Hi everyone, you're watching a live broadcast with wedding planner Priti Raichura and broadcaster. This is probably a moment you've all been waiting for quite some time. We do have a wedding lawyer joining us here today, Pranav Banot, who's joining me live. Thank you very much to all the people that have been sending in some of your questions from suppliers and from clients alike. And we will try and get through as much as we can today. Now, let me just unmute. You can see Pranav is already with us, and I'm just going to try and unmute his microphone. There we go. Hi, Pranav. How are you doing?
They're very well, Priti. How are you?
I'm good. It's been a very busy week. I'm sure it has for you as well. Especially following the Prime Minister's announcement that we had earlier this week in terms of some of the forthcoming plans that he has later on in the year. But I wanted to talk to you a little bit more about that. But before we start, I just wanted to thank you very much for taking the time out to join me here today on the Let's Chat to Priti Raichura Show, and to kind of help clients and suppliers alike in terms of this little bit of a mess that's been created because of COVID. I know we're not the only industry that that is suffering, but of course, that there's lots of people suffering as a result of this pandemic. So thank you very much for taking the time out to join us here today.
Thank you.
For the benefit of some of the people that are joining us right now, just kind of tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Yeah, well, firstly, Priti, thank you very much for having me today. So my name is Pranav Banot. I head the wedding law team at a law firm called Meeby & Co. But I founded an online blogging platform called The Wedding Lawyer. This was about 3-4 years ago, actually after I got married. And what I realized was actually, we're in a multi-billion-pound industry. Different figures, different websites portray different figures about the real value, but it's between 12 and 20 billion pound industry in this country. But what we find is, and what I found some years ago was actually it was completely unregulated. Fortunately, what we found with the pandemic is it's really shone a magnifying glass quite onto how, where some of the gaps are, in terms of the lack of regulation, the lack of, I think sometimes the way in which contracts are drafted, I think really it's been a real magnifying glass on some of the gaps in the industry, which fortunately explains why we're in the situation that we're in.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And I think for lots of suppliers, it's definitely been an eye-opener. Now, you said that you got married, about 4 years ago, and you probably noticed that gap. And certainly as a wedding planner, suppliers that I work with, suppliers that I like working with, some of them actually don't even have a contract in place, and if they do, they're very wishy-washy. They don't mean anything. And you probably noticed that when you got married, that you asked someone, well, hang on, I'm leaving you with a deposit. Where's the guarantee? What are you actually going to deliver for me on my wedding day? And don't worry, we'll be there. Like for example, a caterer may say, these are the items of food that will be, serving at your wedding, and this is what we'll be doing. And you're just like, okay, and is that it? Do I need to do anything else? But it certainly, I think, has been an eye opener for lots of suppliers, but clients and couples alike. I think for couples that have never been married before, never had this experience before, I think it's definitely been kind of hard hitting on them, because they don't quite know what to do, who to turn to. And as a wedding planner, I've been there trying to help clients out for the whole year, trying to unpick where the gaps have been and trying to find them the help that they require. Now, we, in the wedding industry, since the Prime Minister made his announcement on Monday, we've been inundated with inquiries. Lots of people are probably thinking, oh, right, come the 21st of June, where it said no restrictions in place will mean their big fat wedding or big fat Indian wedding, whatever wedding they're going to have, can go ahead. What does it actually mean when we say that, or when the government says that, come 21st of June, things will be relaxed?
Well, it's a really good question. I mean, I'm sure all of us sat in front of our TVs last week and were elated, whether you're a supplier or a couple due to get married, by the roadmap. And actually, I was certainly taken by surprise that by the 21st of June, all limits are technically going to be removed. So it was, far quicker than I could ever have imagined. It seems a bit too good to be true, but I think, we should remain positive and optimistic that actually, if all goes well with the vaccination rollout and the other conditions that are set out, and that's really important, anything in terms of opening up is contingent on conditions being met. But, if the 21st of June takes place, well, we are pretty much, I would have thought, in the position we would have been before the pandemic, weddings being able to take place as they were always intended to be, and suppliers being able to trade. But I think there's, a few things that we've got to bear in mind. There is the events research program, which I'm not sure how many of you are aware of that, but there is actually going to be a think tank slash research group that are going to look at what the impact is of kind of COVID transmission post the vaccine at events. And we're only going to really understand what the results of that is going to be kind of in the end of April.
Right. Yeah.
At this stage, it is really early days. I can understand why, suppliers want to quickly get as many contracts signed up as possible. Couples want to progress with their weddings, but, we are actually some way away from the 21st of June. And there's a lot of hurdles that I think we've got to meet before we get to the point. So let's keep our fingers crossed. But, I think we've got a long way to go. If all goes well, then I think weddings will be going ahead. I think there will still be, you see, the thing is, Priti, and you may understand this, I think even if, let's say, on the 22nd of June, you could technically have a 700-person wedding, which I know some of the weddings up in Leicester, sometimes have. I think there is one being legally being able to do that. But there's also a social element. Do people feel comfortable?
Yes.
Everything that we've been through over the past year and a half to actually put themselves in that position.
Yeah.
So I think we've got some way to go yet, but certainly a positive roadmap, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly positive news. You're absolutely right, and I think literally you will have noticed this as well as I did. Straight after the announcement, I noticed lots of suppliers, putting out kind of live feeds on their social media platforms and putting things out saying, come the 21st of June, no restrictions. But there was, there was a little bit of, what they say that the bit in small writing that you must read. It's dependent not on dates, but on data. And like you just said, the vaccination are being rolled out really, really well. They're very successful to date. And just before we came live, I saw that I think there's 20 million now that have been vaccinated, which is brilliant news in the UK. But with the new variant, if things continue, and it does look like, they are able to apply pressure on the new variant with this vaccination, but should couples that are trying to plan for their big weddings, and certainly say, for example, couples that are due to get married in, the first week of, say, July, second week of July, do you think that they are safe to do so, to continue to plan? Because I'm a planner and people come to me to say, help us plan. And what is it that we should be looking out for? Because I've had lots of people saying, right, I want to get on with my plans. I want to have my big fat Indian wedding come July, and I want to continue with plans. But what is it that we need to be looking at to ensure that, we are fully covered? And obviously we were going to remain compliant to make sure everybody's safe. But what else should we be looking for?
Yeah, it's a really, really good question. Well, the first thing is it's the big C word that the government kept using earlier this week, proceed with caution. It's industry to get on and pick themselves up. And I know you've got suppliers listening to this, you've got couples listening to this.
Yeah.
We should be looking at a collaborative approach to move forward. So, that's good for the industry. but caution should always be adopted, particularly because we don't know. You and I don't have a crystal ball to know what will happen from the 22nd of June onwards, and that's fundamental. However, I think there are a few things that a few tips that I would probably like to share. I'm going to keep it simple. I'm going to just give 3 or 4. The first is for couples, particularly where you can pay by credit or debit card. I think that's always a good starting point, and I appreciate not all suppliers have means to allow you to do that, but it's asking the question, because even where you have paid by credit or debit card and you find that there is some issue, your credit and debit card company can actually step in and help you in relation to that dispute and get some of your money back if need be. The second, if you're going to enter into new contracts, have a careful look about what the COVID provisions are in there. What happens if you need to postpone? What are the conditions allowing you to postpone? If you can't go ahead with the event, what are the rules about refunds? I appreciate Priti and I had to talk about this, and suppliers on this call. There is a lot of work suppliers have to do behind the scenes.
Yeah,
couples don't always appreciate that.
No.
So it's important to have a very open and frank discussion between the supplier to understand what work's going to happen between now and the 21st of June and what impact that is going to have on any deposits that are being held.
Yeah.
And that's really fundamental, having an open, transparent discussion about that. And I think the whole thing, and if I may just use this platform, we don't know what's going to happen about vaccine passports at this point in time. I know it's a point that the government are looking at the moment, but what we do know is if a vaccine passport came in, they could be applicable to certain venues.
Yeah.
So particularly if you've got the members of the BAME community watching, if you don't mind, maybe we could use this as an opportunity to encourage people to go out there and get the vaccine. Even if you've got your own reservations about, whatever they are about vaccinations, there is every likelihood and possibility that certain venues will say, we would like to see some evidence that you're even negative on a COVID test or you've had a vaccine before we're going to let you have a 700, 500 or 300 person event.
Yes.
That's some of the practical and legal measures you could be taking at this stage.
Yeah. No, I absolutely agree with you. I mean, I totally agree that people, if they are offered the vaccine, they should consider taking it. And I know there's pros and cons for the vaccine. I know lots of people are, thinking, well, I'll be fine. And we've all seen that, there's been quite a lot of people that have been affected, unfortunately, by the virus. We all know somebody that has unfortunately lost their life as a result of the virus. And, as a planner myself, walking in to a wedding or an event, I would want to ensure that the safety of all the guests that are there is paramount. It has to be. And I would want to see that myself, because I wouldn't want any of my couples to feel that, because of their wedding ceremony, because of them getting married, their uncle or auntie or, friend ended up, getting the virus and then ultimately kind of passing away, because that's also not very nice to kind of live with. So I think you're absolutely right. I do think this passport, the vaccine passport, it's on its way as well. We don't know how soon any of that's going to happen, but I do think that you're right. It's definitely on the cards. Now, for those people that have postponed their wedding, not once, not twice, maybe 2 or 3 times, and then are due to probably get married, even say May time. At the moment, May, they can get married and it can only be a very small wedding, which means I've already had couples contact me to say, I do want to get married, but I'm going to postpone it again. And I'm going to postpone it until July, August. And I know lots of other suppliers have also had the same call. Now, we have been inundated. Pranav, I know you've been inundated trying to help clients and suppliers all week. What would you suggest to those clients? What should they be thinking about? I know they've been through a rough ride because I've been with them on that ride for the whole year, when they had to postpone their weddings. And now they've got this time frame between kind of March to June to try and hold fire, to decide whether they want to get married April or May time, or whether they want to postpone. Now, some of them are facing I guess, barriers now in terms of when they're going back to their suppliers, where the suppliers are saying, hang on a minute, we've already postponed your wedding once. Just get on and have a small wedding. Just go ahead and do it. We can't do it again because some suppliers are saying, we're already booked. And now I cannot give you a refund. We've already been there with you on your ride. What would you suggest to them?
Yeah, it's a difficult one, isn't it? Because I think at the time of suppliers drafting contracts, it would have been drafted in such a way that you couldn't have foreseen the pandemic and the impact it would have had.
Yeah.
I think my view is as follows. The first thing for both your suppliers listening to this and the consumers listening to this is, again, trying to find a happy medium given the uncertainty. We do know from the 8th of March 2021, 6 people can attend a wedding. From the 12th of April, it's 15. From the 17th of May, it's 30. And the 21st of June, it's unlimited, as far as the app is concerned. I guess the limits on numbers of people attending is between March and the 21st of June.
Yeah.
I think couples, if as far as you possibly can or are willing to have a smaller event, I think it's worth having that chat with your suppliers to see whether you can negotiate some sort of, even if it is a discounted rate, because you've got a fewer number of people, that would certainly be kind of the easiest way to deal with things.
Yeah.
But understand that not all couples want to get married with a reduced number of people. So the next is looking at postponement. And if you can negotiate postponement, Priti, I'm sure you will agree, postponements are good for the industry because it means that traders can keep trading at some point, and at some point a couple can eventually get married. Now, in terms of how you negotiate that postponement, I think the starting point is always looking at what the contract says. Is there any penalties or any additional fees that need to be paid if you're going to postpone? I think you've got to have a very careful look at what the contractual documentation says about postponement. And I think it should really only be a last resort where you decide that actually you either want to come out of the contract altogether, and then there may be arguments of frustration, and we can maybe talk about that later, or negotiate some sort of settlements where the parties agree that you'll go your separate ways. You won't hold each other to the terms of the contract, and you basically settle the matter without it getting too ugly. And for the industry, I think that's, and me even telling you as a lawyer, somebody who goes to court day in and day out, I would always recommend trying to settle a matter rather than trying to go down the stringent court route, because going to court is timely, it takes a lot of time up, it's costly, and it's also somewhat uncertain because we don't know how a judge would necessarily adjudicate matters on the.
Sure, but that's the thing. I mean, things have actually got very messy with some suppliers that I've been speaking to, and couples as well. How do you settle? How do you settle? What's a happy medium? How do you go about? So let me give you an example, and this is an example that has that was emailed over to me. A couple wanting to get married. They were supposed to have got married last year. The marriage didn't go ahead. They postponed to this year. Most suppliers were okay with it. They now have decided themselves that they actually don't want to get married now at all, and they don't know when their marriage will take place. They've gone back to their suppliers, and suppliers are not now offering a refund. Now, I know in terms of the CMA guidance that it does suggest that you find a happy medium and suppliers can retain some of that money based on, if they've had a consultation, with the client, and basically they can justify that they can retain some of that money and then offer a refund back. But where's the happy medium here?
Okay, really, really good question. This is only obviously legal guidance because I think any specific advice would have to really depend on how the contract is drafted and what the communication is between a supplier and their client. But let me try and simplify it. If either the couple or the supplier have cancelled the contract, have said we no longer want to go ahead, and you gave me that, you said that in the example, there was a contract, there was an event supposed to happen this year, and they actually just don't want to go ahead. Yeah. Well, that's not necessarily a good enough excuse to ask for a full refund of your money.
Yeah.
The CMA and the underlying law behind it only really talk about being able to get a refund or a partial refund where it's impossible for the event to go ahead, or for the event to go ahead, it will be radically different to what was in the mind of the parties when they got into the contract. Okay, there's a fundamental distinction between cancelling and actually not cancelling, but the event just simply not being able to go ahead because the government have set out various restrictions in place. So if I use that latter example, what if you want the event to go ahead as a couple or a supplier, but it just can't because the numbers of guests are just not allowed, or there's some other government restriction? Well, in that event, the starting point is a full refund. However, what the law says is that a supplier could potentially retain a sum of money that they're holding, which is, as the law says, just taking into account all the circumstances of the case. And if you don't mind, I would like to almost put that in inverted commas, because that is a fundamental point. If there's nothing else that your listeners take away from this call, it is that a supplier can hold what is just, i.e. fair, taking into account all the circumstances of the case. And the reason why I want to stress that point, CMA have been quite helpful in setting out lots of different costs that can potentially be claimed by a supplier and what shouldn't be claimed by a supplier. And that is helpful. And of course, may look at that by way of guidance, but the law, and fundamentally what a lawyer would be standing up in front of the court to argue is, well, judge, a supplier can only retain what is just taking into account all the circumstances. So, for example, there may be things that suppliers have done that the CMA haven't covered. That doesn't mean you can't necessarily claim that, because it may be just taking into account the circumstances. Conversely, there may be things that a supplier shouldn't be claiming for because it's just not fair. And again, we look at this test as to whether it's just taking into account all the circumstances. So all I'd like to say, I would like to stress is the CMA is useful, but I do sometimes stops short, and for good reason. They're not a legal body, but they does stop short as to what the law says and how a court may interpret the case if it went in front of a judge.
Well, and so are suppliers legally obliged then to follow the CMA guidelines?
Well, the CMA, by their own admission, say that it's only guidelines. I think that's fundamental. It is guidance. And the thing with the frustration, and that is really what this is all about. And I appreciate, not every one of your listeners are fully aware of the doctrine, because it is a complicated doctrine, but it is really for a court to make the decision as to whether the court believes the contract has been frustrated or not. So it's not the CMA that says that's what's happened. It's only evidence, and it's really up to a court to decide. And I think the CMA have said that on a number of different areas of their guidance, that it's ultimately for a court to decide, whether a contract has been frustrated, and if so, what is fair to be returned to a couple, and what a supplier can legitimately retain. Sure,
no, absolutely. Now I know. Don't know what that was. That sounded like an echo from my side. I know that unfortunately, lots of suppliers have had to liquidate, have gone bust basically because of the current climate, and that's no fault of the clients. Couples have trusted and put their trust, to reputable companies that unfortunately have gone bust. I've had lots of couples coming to me saying, we don't know what to do now. They've ran off. Literally, this is what they feel. They've ran off with my money, and I don't really know what to do. Phones have been switched off. They can't get hold of the supplier at all. And I know that there's a question coming up here from Falkner who's saying, what happens if a caterer goes into liquidation? Well, we'll just broaden that. It could be anybody. It could be any supplier that goes into liquidation. What would you suggest then that the client at that point does?
It's really unfortunate that it's a really good question, but a really unfortunate question, because early on in the pandemic, we didn't have to worry too much about liquidation of suppliers, but it's becoming a more and more common question. And so it's a really unfortunate question, but a good one. Now, the bad news is that it's very difficult actually to get money out of a supplier that's gone into liquidation, and I've got to be completely honest. And the for that is because if you think about a business, a business may have lots of different creditors or lots of different people who are owed money. And to keep it simple, clients who've paid money, they don't fall at the very top of the priority list of the various organizations that are owed money. For example, a bank would be, supposing the supplier had taken a loan from the bank, they would be the first to be paid. And actually, there may be other creditors ahead of. So the bad news is it can be a bit difficult. However, that doesn't mean that you as a couple should completely give up. In fact, quite the opposite. I think what you should do is look very carefully about who the administrator is, because you would often get an administrator in charge of the liquidation process. If you don't know who that is, and your supplier isn't telling you, you could look on the Companies House website, because quite often it would set out who the administrator is.
Yeah.
Once you've done that, the administrator can be contacted, or you may well be contacted by the administrator, and you would have to fill in a claim form, be a meeting that you would have to attend, obviously on Zoom, given the circumstances, or some other online platform. And you basically set out your case, set out what you've paid, and what you hope to get back. And it will really be for an administrator to work out, whether that's likely to be the case or not. So don't stop just as soon as you hear that your supplier has gone into administration. There are steps to be taken, and the most fundamental step is to engage openly with your administrator that's been appointed to deal with this.
Right.
The only thing I would like to add, just by two additional points to conclude, is that very few suppliers, but there are some suppliers, very few, have decided to simply close off their business and open a new business with a very similar name. So almost close the company, wipe off the debts, and then start a new business. That's wrong.
Yeah.
It could be in breach of a set of rules called the Insolvency Act.
Okay.
It's very important that if you're a couple, you keep a very close eye on what your supplier is doing next if they have liquidated that company. Because now we've got a roadmap. I wouldn't be surprised if some suppliers think, oh, hang on a minute, perhaps I liquidated too early. Let me just go up a very similar named company and start trading again. Yeah. And they could get caught there. So just bear that in mind. And a very final, very, very, very final point. The pandemic will disappear one day, but practices in the wedding industry will not. So one thing I would like to say is that if you're a couple and you're going to enter into a contract with a supplier in the future, maybe you're due to get married next year or the year after, think very carefully about what the financial position is of that company that you're trading with before you sign a contract. Because if you're going to hand over £30,000 to them, for example, and they have no money in their bank, they have no assets, then you're going to have to think very carefully whether that's the money you want to hand over to an organization like that.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And I think we've probably all heard of companies that have gone into administration, and couples don't have this information. So I think that's really good information to follow up for couples that have been making inquiries. Like I said, for myself, and I thought it was a perfect opportunity to get you on a live with us today. Now, Pranav, the other thing, myself and I know lots of other planners and other suppliers, friends, you've probably been helping couples making insurance claims. Now, when insurance claims have been made, I'm aware that some of my clients have had to make insurance claims because venues have gone into administration, and this is the early part of last year, when the pandemic first started. They've made insurance claims. Those claims still a year on haven't actually come through. What is the timelines that any couple should be looking at?
Yeah, it's a good question. The first point is that quite often when you're making an insurance claim, the policy that you've entered into will set out the time frame. So always, everything I say will be contingent on what the policy says, but quite often you would be required to make a claim as soon as possible. In terms of insurance companies dealing with your claim, well, it very much depends on what their best practice is. Quite often, it should be a few months. It is a few months, really, from my own personal experience. But and how swamped I'm sure many insurance companies are at the moment. I'm sure that timeline has gone up. If you're not happy with the service that you're getting from your insurance company, or if you don't agree with the way they have made a decision about your matter, actually, you might find that the next most cost-effective step isn't necessarily going to a lawyer, but reporting them to the financial ombudsman service. Look into their conduct and look into the kind of specifics of the matter and make a decision as to whether the conduct of the insurance company is reasonable or not. What I found is those couples who have gone to insurers because their suppliers have liquidated have had more luck in getting a payout compared to those that have gone to their insurance companies and saying the wedding couldn't go ahead because of COVID. Whilst a handful of insurance companies are paying because of COVID restrictions preventing the wedding from going ahead, my understanding, there are still many insurance companies that are not paying for such claims. So just bear that in mind. Right.
And in terms of couples now that have got engaged, say this year, for example, we just, we had Valentine's Day that has just passed, and we're aware that, lots of people got engaged this month. And will be wanting to plan their future either this year or next year. What would you suggest to them that they should now look out for? Because we don't know, like you said, one day the pandemic will go. One day we will able to try and, maybe the vaccinations will help, or there will be some kind of control over the virus. But between now and whenever they decide to get married, what is it that they should actually be looking out for?
Yeah, really good question. Well, it fundamentally comes down to what they're signing up to, what their agreement says. I know that sounds like a really typical lawyer thing to say, but if I can just maybe give 3 or 4 examples of things to look out for. I have got a full checklist that is free to download on our website, and it's up to you whether you would like to point any of your clients to it. But actually, it's a checklist that I think clients and couples should follow when looking at a contract. But essentially, the key things are understanding who the parties are to the contract. I know that sounds really obvious. But that's probably one of the biggest issues that are found during the pandemic. Couples actually know who they're contracting with. For example, Wedding Designs 123. That's a fake company, obviously. It's just one of, that doesn't necessarily mean that's a registered incorporated company. That could just be an individual working in some remote town trading under that name. So if there is one thing to really bear in mind, is be clear on who is the other party that you're paying your hard-earned money to, and be clear on that. The second is, I'm hoping we're beyond the pandemic from June onwards, but you may well want to ensure that there are COVID-related provisions. What if the event can't go ahead? What happens in terms of your money? What happens if you need to postpone? Will you have to pay for a postponement or pay a fee if you did postpone? What happens in the event of fewer guests being able to attend? Because I think naturally, just because the UK come out of, technically come out of the lockdown on the 21st of June onwards, that doesn't mean other countries will be. And I know many of your listeners have got relatives from maybe India or South Africa or from America. They're working at a different rate. So what happens if the numbers of guests don't quite add up to what they believed be attending? So having these kind of discussions now, early, as soon as possible, and maybe even maybe these discussions should happen before you've even entered into the contract, or before you even decided which suppliers to go for. Maybe you should think about going with the suppliers that are going to be the most flexible for you, because you're going to want to make sure that your hard-earned money is protected.
Of course.
And that's what my view is in terms of going forward from now to perhaps next year.
Sure.
There's about 20 points to look out for in a contract, but I'm not going to necessarily go into all 20 now. But I have set out a checklist.
And how can people find them? So you might not even
so if you don't mind, just there's a free downloadable checklist on the Wedding Lawyer website, theweddinglawyer.co.uk. No charge. Download it. And, if you get presented with a contract from your supplier, it would be a good idea to have this checklist next to you and through making sure that, you've thought about all the points that the checklist is talking about. The real sad reality, Priti, is that most of the people that I've spoken to have spent longer deciding their playlist at their wedding reception at actually looking at their contracts.
And actually looking,
Sad reality of where we are at the moment.
Sure, and to be fair to the suppliers as well, I don't think any supplier wanted to, take clients, hard-earned money, and then just do a runner. I think it's just the circumstances. Some companies have gone into administration because there is no cash flow. So, some of them have tried to give back whatever they can, try and be fair to them. And others now are trying to say, okay, what's the happy medium? How can we continue to support you if you want to continue with your plans to get married in the future? So I think that's really important where you said, got to sit down and negotiate a way forward. And I think you said that. So I think that's really good.
And the other thing is actually the vast majority of suppliers, including in the Asian wedding industry, have been fantastic.
Yeah.
We've been working, and I'm sure you have too, supporting couples from the 23rd of March onwards to now. And honestly speaking, up to now, it's the same few suppliers that are being very difficult, and the majority are being absolutely amazing. So,
I agree.
no means should be a witch hunt against suppliers, because actually the vast majority have been fantastic. But there are unfortunately a very, very, very small minority, as you have in any any sector, that are being slightly more heavy-handed.
No, absolutely. Pranav, we have another question here as well, and this comes from a client who has planned to get married abroad. The wedding takes place in August this year in Portugal. It's a wedding for 300 people. But what she wants to know is, if for whatever reason she can't fly her guests over, and that's because of maybe the countries abroad are not going to allow Brits to enter into their countries for whatever reason to do with the pandemic, what are her legal rights?
So it always gets a bit tricky with international weddings, and the first thing to look at is always which country is responsible for the interpretation of the contract and the enforcement of the contract. So look at the contracts and look at whether it's the courts of England and Wales or whether it's a local court in Portugal. I can only really advise on England and Wales rather than in itself, but that's always the first thing to look at. I know the airline industry and the travel industry have been pretty good at giving refunds. So in terms of the actual logistics of getting people there and back, I'm hoping that won't be too much of an issue. It could be difficult if suppliers from this country are saying, look, we're ready to perform our contract. It's not our fault that Portugal are not letting us in. If the Portuguese suppliers are saying, look, we're ready to perform the contract, it's not our fault, you can't travel here. So it is a bit tricky. There are some key questions to look out for in terms of which country is going to be responsible for the adjudication of the contract. But I'm hoping it won't be a problem. But I think you've got to have, without kind of looking at all the correspondence and looking at the contract, it's slightly difficult to advise with any kind of clarity. But there are lots of ifs, in the sense that if we can travel there and Portugal are not letting us in, it may well be that you find yourself in difficulties. So I would say perhaps at this stage, having open and transparent conversations with suppliers, seeing if you can maybe negotiate, an exit clause, go your separate ways in the worst case scenario, that might be a sensible way forward at this point. I'm sorry, a convoluted answer, only because there are lots of ifs and buts when it comes to international travel and how UK contracts engage with that process.
Sure. Now, I'm getting another message coming through on WhatsApp from a supplier who's tuned in and is saying some of our costs now have gone up as a result of the pandemic. And this is coming through from a caterer. I won't say which caterer it is, but they're saying that couples have now reduced the amount of guests that will be attending their wedding, which means that, they can't cook, so they were supposed to cater for, 400 people. It's now gone down to just 50. And this is post the 21st of June. And I guess these clients must be, kind of being a little bit wary. But, so anyway, the cost of their per head has gone up, but it's not in their contract because they never thought this would happen. What advice can you give to them?
Well, at this stage in time, if it's post the 21st of June, if the government, if all goes well, then the contract stays as was agreed, because as far as we're concerned, events can happen without restrictions. So you stick to the contractual terms is the short answer and the straightforward answer. However, it may be that the contract, your supplier's contract, sets out what happens if there is a reduction in numbers. For example, what is quite commonly found in catering contracts is that there's a minimum number of people that need to be met, and therefore that's the minimum value of the contract. As things stand, a supplier could probably rely on their strict rights under the contract, and say, we're not going to be bound by any restrictions right now. If you want to reduce the number of people, that's your prerogative, but these are what our terms say. And providing those terms are fair, your supplier can rely on them, and it could potentially be a breach of contract if the people still insist on not paying what they should be paying for them.
Of course, yeah. No, absolutely. I think that's really useful information. And the same, in fact, I've got another message now coming through from another supplier saying they were supposed to have flown out to a place in Malta. Again, I won't say which place, to deliver, to take a video for a client. That has now been postponed to this year. They don't know if the wedding will still continue this year. The client hasn't come back to them in terms of whether the wedding will be taking place or not. But their costs as a supplier, again, have gone up. It's increased because of all the other new overheads that will be coming their way as a result of COVID. What are your suggestions?
Right. Well, what I would suggest is this. The first thing any supplier should be looking out for is whether the contract allows for incremental increase in charges year on year. I have read lots of supplier contracts where that is actually a provision that's inserted in there, because you have things like inflation and various costs that go up year on year. And particularly with Brexit, we are finding the cost of meat, for example, or the cost of flowers is going up year on year. So first is look at the contract to see whether you have made provision for an increase in price. That's the first. If you haven't, the situation can be more complicated, because the consumer law doesn't really like suppliers simply just throwing costs at a consumer where the consumer wasn't aware of those costs. What is so important in a consumer contract is transparency. But what you could do is potentially see whether you can add an addendum to your contracts and say, look, we want to carry on with this event. There are some costs that are completely out of our hands because of the COVID pandemic, maybe Brexit. There may be all sorts of tariffs coming in that suppliers simply were not aware of. And look, would you be willing to vary this contract to take into account a small increment or a reasonable increment in the costs of the provision of the services that we need to provide? And I think that's probably the safest way to do it, in terms of trying to, add up costs that your couples were not aware of at the time of signing the agreement. That's what my real kind of honest advice would be in relation to that. What I would advise against is simply saying our costs have gone up, pay it, or we just won't perform the contract, because there are all sorts of complications there as to whether that term is a fair term. The term being pay up, and you could find yourselves in some hot water if you were to do that.
Of course, no, absolutely, I agree. I'm just going to go to the messages and have a quick look if there's anything on the live messages. We have Shim, who says, I think the psychology has become smaller gatherings. You can invite many to your big wedding, but how many will actually turn up moving forward? And I guess I guess that's true. You could end up with large venues and they may be kept empty. And I think that's absolutely, true. We have been seeing lots of virtual weddings taking place. People tuning in. We've got all these different platforms now where the media team would turn up, and I certainly know through my own media company, we've done virtual weddings before the lockdown, and people, elderly people from abroad could watch the wedding virtually. So that, I don't know if that's going to be a new trend that we'll maybe seeing. I've certainly had many people, giving me a call this week saying, well, we want to continue with our plans. So let's see what happens. Hopefully we will be able to overcome this big mess. Jamie is saying lots of information there for future for thought. Thank you for that. We've already addressed the question around companies that go into administration. We've got okay, so Nirmala Ben is just saying, get a Portuguese caterer and go to a nice beach. Great. Great. Well, that's some of the comments that are just coming up. I think lots of people are just tuned in and probably making notes in terms of some of the information that you've been giving out there. For those people that want your help, Pranav, where can they contact you if you'd like to give out?
Well, they can of course go and contact you, and I know you and I are in touch with each other. The easiest way would be via the website, thewedడింglawyer.co.uk, or the socials, particularly Facebook and Instagram. That's usually the easiest way and the quickest way just to get in touch. There's lots of new information that we're putting out free of charge, just to try and help both suppliers and couples. So I can only suggest maybe joining us on the socials if you would like, and just keep on top, because we will be providing updates as and I'm sure you will be too. Ours will be more from a legal perspective rather than from a wedding planning perspective.
No, absolutely. And I have some of your updates, that we've been doing on Insta, and they've been really, really useful. And for anybody wanting to follow Pranav on his Instagram as well, it's under The Wedding Lawyer, isn't it? Is that right?
That's right.
Do follow him, because he's been doing his own lives and they've been really informative. And just to finally say that, I think we've all been there trying to help couples. We're not there to kind of hard do them in any way. So it's really good. Sometimes lawyers, planners, suppliers have got themselves a bad name. Oh no, we have to pay for it. But we're all in this together, and there's some real genuine people out there that are there to help genuinely. There's nothing there in terms of like trying to make some kind of money from it. Obviously, it costs people their time. That's all it is, and you can give people free information, and that's what's been happening throughout the whole pandemic. So it's really nice to know that you're there to offer some general legal advice to couples who may need it. So thank you so much, Pranav, for joining me.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for all the work that you're doing to support couples and suppliers in these really unusual times.
No, it really is, and hopefully come June, we'll be able to have a nicer summer than we did last year. So thank you once again, Pranav,
for
joining me live, and no doubt we shall be in touch with you very, very soon. Take care.
Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye-bye. So that was Pranav Banot. That was just joining me there live, a wedding lawyer. Do get in touch with him if you need any legal advice, or of course do follow him on his Insta page. It's very informative. I've seen some of his lives and they are extremely informative. I'll be back again next week with another guest. Let's hope things genuinely do start looking up. I was just watching the news before I started this live, and like I said at the beginning, the vaccination program is going really, really well. And, with the progress that the UK are making, there's no reason why events and weddings can't take place. But do remember, it is based on data as opposed to dates. So, of course, we've got to keep updated with what we hear on the news. We do know rates are slowly falling in terms of COVID transmission. So that's all good news. So hopefully we will have a better year. But from me, Priti Raichura, I shall catch up with you all same time next week. Goodbye for now. Take care and stay safe.